Our story continues. Chapter 11. Odyssean had heard the voices for several moments now, and although a part of him sought to react to them, his body would not obey. "He has still not opened his eyes," came what he vaguely noted as Mendeln's voice, but that was not possible. Mendeln was lost to him. Odyssean recalled thinking that he had heard Mendeln earlier, yet that too had to have been his imagination.
"Have patience, young one. Her strike was as subtle as it was heinous."
Even unconscious, Odyssean jolted the moment that the second speaker voiced himself, for the words resounded in both the head and the soul of the son of Diomedes. He must have moaned at the same time, for that which sounded like Mendeln suddenly grew excited. "Did you see? He stirred. Odyssean, listen to me. Come to me. By our father and mother, you'll not leave me like this." Mention of his parents finally caused Odyssean to actually wake. He remembered how he had felt when Mendeln had vanished. If this was indeed his brother, he could not very well let him suffer so, not if it was in his power to do anything. And then there was Cerynthia. That proved more than enough. With a cry, Odyssean struggled free of the last vestiges of unconsciousness. Immediately his body was racked with terrible pain. He rolled about and perhaps might have hurt himself in the process, if not for hands grabbing him by the shoulder in order to keep his body still. Yet again, he heard Mendeln. "Be at ease, Odyssean. Be at ease. It will pass. Most of it, anyway."
"There is much within that will take longer. The demoness is a poison deep in his blood."
"And I could have stopped her. If only you'd all have let me," snapped Odyssean's brother. "I could have prevented so much."
"Not then. You would have been slaughtered, and Odyssean more in her grip."
"But you said that she went in unsuspecting of the betrayal. That alone..." A third voice intruded, just as Odyssean forced his eyes open. Vague shapes and much darkness greeted the battered man's gaze. "My mother is very adaptable, Mendeln Uldaumed. You saw how quickly she turned potential defeat of her plan into a new and possibly more terrifying path toward her ultimate goals. Now, she is nearer than ever to victory and sanctuary, that much nearer to cataclysm." Some of the agony subsided, enough so that Odyssean could finally focus. The first thing he saw gladdened his heart, for it was his brother. Mendeln wore an uncharacteristically broad grin, and Odyssean knew that he wore the same.
"I thought you were lost forever,"
the older brother told the younger. "As are you. Your sibling was always safe," the third speaker interjected. In some ways, his voice was very similar to Mendeln's, in both tone and speech. Yet there was something about it that bespoke of great age and a person who was not entirely human, if at all. And when the figure joined Mendeln in gazing down at Odyssean, the latter saw that this was no mere mortal. The face was too handsome, the features too perfect. Most of all, though, the eyes held more than great age. They were so ancient that Odyssean immediately suspected the worst. "He is no demon," Mendeln quickly stated, recognizing his brother's reaction. "Although Lilith is my mother," added the stranger. With an animalistic growl, Odyssean sought to grab the speaker. However, his body was too weak. Worse, intense pain coursed through him again, forcing him to lie back, Only then did he notice the stars. Their positions were so different from what Odyssean was familiar with that he momentarily forgot the demoness's offspring.
Where are we, Mendelm?
Odyssean finally asked.
I don't recognize any of those.
It was the son of Lilith who responded. You are somewhere and nowhere. Such answers only served to stir Odyssean back to anger. He did not trust being in the vicinity of a being who claimed Lilith as the one who had begat him.
And who are you? If not a demon, then what are you?
My name is Rathma,
the stony figure answered without preamble.
Although that is not the name given to me at birth, but rather one that was placed upon me by another after parting from my parents' ways. It means keeper of the balance, which is also my function and duty.
Odyssean had no idea what Rathma spoke about, and cared less.
But Lilith is your mother.
And Inarius is my father. Yes. I see that name also fills you with dread. I bear no grudge for that, for both have become anathema to me, as I am to them. As to what I am. I am a Nephilim, one of the very first, in fact.
The revelation should have struck Odyssean harder than it did, but quickly he realized that it had not, because horribly aware of who Rathma claimed for his lineage, there was no other possible answer.
You are like us.
Rathma shook his head.
No. I am unlike you, or any of those who follow you. I cannot explain, but what you call the gift has metamorphosed. There are abilities that I have that you do not. Just as you bear some, I am lacking. I suppose this should not so surprise me, since I am from the very first generation, birthed on Sanctuary.
So long ago as all that.
Odyssean thought in awe. Lilith's son nodded, as if having read the mortal's mind, then added,
There are few of us remaining, for when only my father was left of the original refugees, he was strict in his punishment of those who used their powers. He insisted that his perfect world, his sanctuary, would remain as he desired it.
Rathma shook his head.
But for one who is eternal, my father should have known that nothing stays static.
That is enough for now.
Came that other voice from both within and without Odyssean. He pushed himself up, seeking the source, and his eyes for some reason looked to the stars above. For the first time, Odyssean imagined that he even saw a shape formed by the celestial lights. Not a complete one, but enough to give the illusion of a vast, half-hidden beast. A reptile? No, something more than that. It was long and sinewy, like a great snake, but the head reminded him of another creature straight out of myth. A dragon. Yes, it looked like some sort of serpentine dragon. The stars shifted, and it seemed to Odyssean that the half-seen behemoth now stared back at him.
Though we would wish it otherwise, you are not well enough yet for more strain.
Odyssean swallowed, unable to believe his eyes, his mind, and his heart.
What are you?
He is Dragul, brother, Mendelm explained quietly. Born in creation, defined when the angels and demons who came here formed Sanctuary. He is more its guardian than any other can claim.
A simplified description, albeit most accurate.
Oddly, the introduction of this celestial creature was not what most demanded Odyssean's attention. Hearing the dragon and his brother, and recalling how Rathma had spoken, he felt as if he were listening to three extensions of the same being. Odyssean looked from one to the other, and the feeling only increased.
Mendel,
He muttered.
Mendel, I want to leave here now. Both of us, I mean.
But we cannot, Odyssean. At least not yet. There is so much to learn, and you need recuperation. Rathma stood next to the younger son of Diomedes.
He speaks the truth. It would be unwise at this juncture.
Odyssean swallowed. Rathma and Mendel looked more like brothers than he and his sibling did. The dark garments, the pale faces, and the nearly unblinking gazes added further to the horrific effect. Forcing himself to his feet, despite the torture to his body, Odyssean growled,
Mendel, look at you. Look at him. Listen to him and that thing. And then yourself. They're doing something to you.
He felt his power rush through his body, fueling his emotions and strength. They had been wrong, his kidnappers. He was more than fit, despite their games. Raising his hands toward his brother, Mendel replied, No, Odyssean! You must not do that! It was too late. Certain that not only were he and Mendel trapped here for dire purposes, but that his sibling was being turned into something to serve the dragons and Rathma's needs. Odyssean unleashed the raw forces within.
You said he was too weakened by her to do this.
Rathma shouted, evidently to Dragul.
He is different. They would all be different. They are no more Nephilim than you are human. They are more.
But the fantastic creature got no further, for then it was that the dragon's empty realm shook as if some giant hand sought to turn it upside down. Odyssean knew that he was the cause, but did not care. He had to free Mendel and him from this black prison. As if responding to his thought concerning his dark surroundings, the elemental forces bursting from Odyssean took on a blinding brightness. Above, Dragul roared. Rathma uttered something in a language unknown, and momentarily the brightness lessened. But Odyssean, fearing that if his effort failed, then all was lost, threw his will into restoring the light. Around him, the very blackness suddenly began shredding as if torn cloth. Utter white at first replaced it. Then, a mountainous landscape erupted full-blown. Mendel called out to Odyssean, but the two looked now to be separated by miles. Fearing to lose his brother again, Odyssean attempted to draw back within him the energies he had released. But it was as if they now fought against him. The new landscape began to shiver and shake, and seemed as ready as the blackness to shred apart. But finally, Odyssean managed to contain his powers. The effort sent him to his knees. His heart pounded, and for a time, his breath came in short gasps. Then, slowly, he registered colder, drier air and soil much harder than that of the jungles. After having grown accustomed to the hotter climate near Khajan, the change left him shivering. Only belatedly did Odyssean finally regain control over his abilities to adjust himself to this new environment. And new it was. He had thought at first that he had returned to the vicinity of his village, but nowhere around Sarum were there mountains so great. In fact, nowhere that he had been looked like this region. The sky was overcast, but Odyssean could still see far enough to marvel at the landscape. No, definitely not near Sarum, Khajan, or anywhere else of which he had heard. Perhaps Mendel might have. Mendel! How could he have forgotten about his brother? Spinning in a circle, Odyssean looked for any sign. but he was alone in a strange land.
Men down!
Odyssean roared.
Men down!
When he received no answer, the son of Diomedes switched tactics.
Rathma! Where are you, damn you? You want me? You and that thing? Well, here I am. Me for my brother. What say you?
His voice echoed throughout the mountains. Without at first realizing it, one particular peak caught his attention. It was taller, vaster than the rest, almost as if a king among kings. The more he looked at the mountain, the more he felt drawn toward it. With a colorful curse at Rathma and Tragul, Odyssean turned his back on the peak. Nothing good could come of it, not if it somehow sought to call to him. He trod up the sloping land, glad that he had not switched to the garments of the Taragians. They were thin and airy, not suitable at all for this region. Even though he could keep himself warm, just wearing shirt, pants, and boots gave him additional mental comfort. Odyssean reached the top of the hill upon which he had found himself, and searched both with his eyes and power for any nearby settlement. However, if there were any in the region, they were hidden from him. All he saw or sensed were trees, hills, and the mountain again. Odyssean stiffened. Yes, there it was. Not any mountain, but the very same peak from which he had been retreating.
More games.
He glared at the overcast sky, seeking the dragon.
I told you, stop this now. Come for me if you want me.
Again, his voice echoed over and over, but still, there was no reply. Odyssean finally decided to get their attention. Mustering his will, he clapped his hands together as hard as he could. The resulting sound was like thunder, so loud, in fact, that it shook the trees and ground. Over and over it repeated, as if some massive but invisible storm swept through the area. He waited, this time certain of success, but after several breaths, Odyssean still stood alone.
Damn you, Rathma!
Odyssean roared. This time, though, his fury was spent. The echoes perished after only 3 or 4 repetitions. Defeated, he knelt down by a rocky growth and buried his face in his hands. Each time Odyssean began to believe he could face those arrayed against him, he was proven wrong. Without warning, the ground shook again, and for a moment Odyssean thought that his efforts had caused some collapse or tremor. He leapt to his feet, not certain exactly what he planned to do, and saw that the shaking was confined to his immediate location. More to the point, centered directly beneath the outgrowth, he started to back away, only to find the ground rising up behind him as well. Ahead, the outgrowth swelled. It stood almost twice as tall as Odyssean and nearly as wide. One part jutted above the rest, giving it some resemblance to a head. And then, 2 eyes opened up in the head. 2 eyes, a deep, rich brown, and almost human. They glanced left, then right, then down at Odyssean, who stood awestruck. There was shifting in the dirt and grass that made up the mound. The outgrowth took a step toward him, huge chunks of stone and more breaking away. Another step, and more collapsing dirt and rock. The thing now had 2 thick, solid legs. It paused, then began shaking itself like a wet hound. More dirt and stone flew away, some of it toward Odyssean, who awoke from his astonishment just in time to deflect the most dangerous ones. First one arm, then the second formed. The earthen giant looked at the blunt end of the initial appendage. Stony fingers suddenly cracked through. A full hand created less than a breath later. The same then happened with the other arm. Odyssean backed up against the dirt wall behind him, but did not otherwise act. If a demon was about to attack him, then this thing was a slow-witted one. It seemed more like a sleeper waking than any threat. The giant flexed its fingers, then surveyed its body as if seeing it for the first time. The eyes shifted, and Odyssean could have sworn that there was a tremendous sadness in them. It spoke. Through a crevice suddenly forming near the bottom of the head, the creature spoke.
Who are you?
It began slowly, each syllable sounding as if the thing was clearing a throat of centuries of disuse.
Who are you?
It repeated stronger.
That calls a name. That calls a name I haven't heard for so very, very long.
As the voice cleared, Odyssean recalled what he had noticed about the eyes. The voice, while still very gravelly, was also almost human.
Who are you?
The being said a third time.
Who calls the name of Rathma? My name is Odyssean Uldiomed, and if you are a servant of Rathma's, then beware, for I've no love for your master.
The giant studied Odyssean, who now stood in a battle stance. Yet something held Odyssean back, prevented him from striking the first blow. A grating, rumbling sound suddenly issued forth from the bizarre creature. Slowly, it evolved into something recognizable. Laughter.
So glad I am to have awakened for a time, if only to hear this.
The thing shook his head, sending more fragments flying.
Rathma. No sense of humor in that one. He would be offended. And for me, no, little Odyssean Uldiomed. Ha! Such a long name for my dry throat. I am no servant of the Dour One. I am Bathos.
He announced this as if Odyssean would know the name and marvel at it. But as the former farmer failed to react, Bathos lost some of his own humor.
The name means nothing to you. Has it been? Has it been so long?
He studied hard his earthen and stone body.
Yes. There is little of me, and much more of the world. What I dreamed for, what I decided must befall me, is working well. Even the forgetting by mortal men.
The wall behind Odyssean collapsed. Odyssean expected some sort of trick, but instead, the giant sat down on a patch of ground that rose up to create a seat for him. Bathos eyed the empty area between him and Odyssean.
The years. They must number 1,000 or more.
He glanced up at the intruder.
Tell me, little Odyssean Uldiomed. Know you the names Vesely and Asu? The names mean as little to me as that of Bathos,
Odyssean admitted.
but all would be preferred to be known by me than that of the monstrous Rathma.
It initially appeared that Bathos did not hear the last, for he looked to the ground once more and muttered to himself,
No, Vesely. Where are you, my brother?
A slight sardonic chuckle escaped the giant.
But no Asu either. How that would irritate her.
As quickly as the humor came, it disappeared.
If even even she still rages.
Odyssean cared little for the creature's ramblings. All that mattered was that this Bathos, whatever he was, knew of Rathma. Perhaps somehow this could aid Odyssean in rescuing Mendeln. He focused on one comment the other had made.
Bathos, you speak of a lost brother. I've one also missing. His name is Mendeln, and he is a victim of Rathma. If you could in some way aid me.
Bathos looked up.
Rathma has no victims. He is not Asu. Never Asu. If she still lives.
Odyssean finally gave up. Bathos had obviously long ago abandoned touch with others, and perhaps even himself. If the strange being was no threat, then it was time for Odyssean to move on. And again, his eyes shifted toward the towering mountain. This time, Odyssean wondered if he should go to it. But as if reading his intention, the macabre figure suddenly animated, leapt up.
Your path lies elsewhere, young one. Not there.
That only made Odyssean even more determined to reach the peak.
And why not there? Because it is forbidden for you.
To be told that further infuriated Odyssean. Thrusting his chin out defiantly, he returned.
A good enough reason to journey to it then.
Bathos swelled in size, and an ominous shadow crossed his earth and rock face. Even the eyes, the almost human eyes, now held a threat.
No, you will not.
The giant moved toward Odyssean, and as he did, more stone and dirt fell away. Now, although he still looked as if created from the very ground, Bathos wore the vague semblance of a bearded warrior. His skin was the brown of the soil, and his hair the green of grass. There was nothing hesitant anymore about his movements, nor about his intentions toward Odyssean. Bathos raised a fist, and in it formed a huge stone club. He swung at the mortal's midsection, but the club deflected off an invisible barrier quickly created by his target. Odyssean already sweated from effort. The giant's strike had nearly penetrated.
You are more than you seem,
rumbled Bathos.
A Nephilim, I would call you. Young one. If not for the fact that I and Rathma may be the last. The last of your age, maybe,
retorted the son of Diomedes.
But time has long passed you, just as you've pointed out. But no matter how many centuries, I yet recall my duty well. And so, Mount Arreat will remain forbidden for you and all else who would desecrate its interior.
He struck the ground with the club, and the land shook so much that Odyssean toppled. More and more, the earthen creature gave way to an ancient warrior, clad in kilt and sandals, and with a golden band around his head. Bathos resembled some barbarian deity. A barbarian deity who radiated raw force such as Odyssean had never faced, not even from Lucian.
We swore that the way to the mount would be forever sealed from those like Asu,
continued a furious Bathos,
who would have used that within to further ravage a weakened world. And though the others may be more of the soil than even I desire to be, in their memory and our oath, I'll continue to fulfill my sacred duty.
He struck the ground again, and Odyssean, who had nearly gotten to his feet, fell back. Odyssean turned that tumble into a roll, a wise maneuver as the club next shattered the stones atop which he had just lain.
I am not the master of the elements that Asu was, young fool. But Bathos wields much might of his own, and speaks about it even more,
snapped Odyssean in turn. From his awkward position, he still managed to focus on his adversary. The giant made for a hard-to-miss target. There was a sound like a thunderclap. The area between the two exploded, as if the very air had caught fire. Both combatants were thrown far from one another. Odyssean struck a tree, jarring his bones so hard he thought that they were all shattered. Despite that, he managed to immediately fall forward into a crouching position and seize a handful of dirt. He threw the handful high into the air and concentrated. The dirt broke apart, becoming a whirling, blinding force that assailed the giant just as he regained his own balance. However, Bathos did not recoil, but rather inhaled and sneezed. The whirlwind broke apart, and the dust formed in a tight ball that landed in the warrior's brown palm. With a bellowing laugh, Bathos raised his hand, and the dirt stretched 2 directions, creating, in the blink of an eye, a spear with a tip that gleamed like a diamond. He threw the spear at Odyssean. Again, the former farmer raised the shield, but this time, it was not quite strong enough. The spear slowed, yet did not halt. Odyssean pressed, but the missile caught him in the left shoulder. He cried out as the point penetrated. Bathos was suddenly before him, the giant gripping the spear with both hands. He obviously intended to drive the spear deeper, for Odyssean had managed to keep the wound fairly shallow.
You were warned. If only you'd not refused to turn away, young one. I'm sworn to do what I must now.
Odyssean clutched the upper edge of the spear. Lightning crackled along the length of it, racing to where his foe held the weapon. Bathos let out a roar as the powerful energy engulfed him. Gritting his teeth, Odyssean shoved the spear from the wound. Falling back, he touched the bloody opening which immediately sealed. The pair paused. Both Odyssean and Bathos gasped for air as their gazes met.
A fine battle,
the giant almost cheerfully called.
It breathes new life into me, recalls me the magnificent challenges I once faced daily. You may find amusement in this, but I don't.
Odyssean snapped.
A friend is dead. My brother is lost. And the woman I love and those who trust in me might all be dead now, while I waste my time on this.
He suddenly straightened.
Continue with your game, if you wish, Bathos. But I'm done with it all. Very well. Keep whatever foul secret you guard in that mountain to yourself. I can't trust that you'll not be returning, young one. And though 'tis in part my own folly that you know of Ariat, and that she houses something, I cannot let you live.
The giant clasped his fists together, but before he could do whatever it was he planned, a figure materialized between them.
But you will let him live, old ox. Not only live, but come with me to the depths of Mount Ariat.
Bathos blurted the name before Odyssean could.
Rathma.
Then, as the other's words registered, a scowl spread across the giant's gravelly features.
Inside the mount. Am I mad from isolation and only dream you? You'd never suggest such a thing.
I am as real as you, Bathos.
To prove his point, Rathma thrust a gloved finger into the taller figure's chest.
And Perhaps even more so,
he added, his glove coming away covered in ground and grass. Rathma shook his head.
I thought you would outlast even me.
I may yet, if you persist in this. How does this one come to need to visit the mount?
Because my mother has returned.
It was all Rathma had to say. Bathos' face changed utterly. He spat, but instead of water, mud landed on the ruined ground. Odyssean realized that Rathma had the right of it concerning the giant. Bathos looked much more like them now, but what the son of Diomedes had first seen was truth. Bathos existed more as spirit. His true body had long ago been replaced by the soil in which he had lain. It bespoke how very old the giant was, and how very long he had likely stood sentinel over this mysterious peak.
Lilith.
Bathos spoke her name, like someone who had just discovered that they had swallowed poison.
She still bears the murders of my parents on her shoulders. They would have never let Inarius slay us, as she said he would, Rathma. I'm sure of it.
And I am not. But that is neither here nor there. My mother saved us, only to become hers. A fate that would have been worse than death. Trust me. As for my father, in the name of his sanctimony, he is capable of things just as terrible.
That stilled the huge warrior completely.
I know that too well.
Then you understand why I shall now take Odyssean to see Mount Arreat's secret.
Bathos nodded.
And no one else will stop you. If they still stand, that is. I've let any who can hear me know that the way must be clear for you and yours.
With a swirl of his cloak, Rathma turned to Odyssean.
Well, son of Diomedes, you wanted to see what lay in the mount. Come, and I will show you.
But something else concerned Odyssean far more.
Where is my brother? Where's Mendeln?
With Tragul. It must be so for now. Events are rushing forward, even swifter than I had imagined that they could. And he too must be ready to aid in the struggle.
Despite Rathma's indifferent tone, Odyssean felt every fiber of his being go taut.
What is it?
It is,
the ancient being said with a sigh.
What it has been. My mother, Lilith. I underestimated her. She has adapted once again.
What? What has she done?
Rathma's gaze shifted to Mount Arreat.
She has gained control of your Adirum, of course.
And before Odyssean could respond, they both vanished from Bathos' side.